I called 911. The dispatcher told me police were already at my daughter-in-law's house for a murder. Those words didn't make sense when I first heard them. My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the phone. I'd called because my granddaughter Charlotte was missing. I thought I was reporting a lost child. Instead, the woman on the other end of that line told me something that would unravel every truth I thought I knew about my family. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up because you need to understand how we got there. You need to know who I was before that phone call shattered my world into pieces I'm still trying to put back together. My name is Margaret Ellison. I'm 71 years old, and I live alone in a small house by Lake Sherwin. The water out here is quiet most days, peaceful in a way that used to comfort me. I moved here with my husband Harold 40 years ago, back when our son Nathan was just a boy. We raised him in this house. We watched him grow up swimming in that lake, fishing off the dock Harold built with his own hands. Harold's been gone 6 years now. Heart attack. Quick and clean, the doctors said, like that was supposed to make it hurt less. It didn't. But I learned to live with the silence. I learned to find peace in the small things. My morning coffee on the porch, the way the sun hits the water at dawn, the occasional visit from Nathan. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. I used to believe that goodness could protect you. That if you lived right, treated people with kindness, raised your children with love, then life would be gentle with you in return. I used to think karma was real, that the universe kept some kind of score. I was wrong about a lot of things. The truth is, life doesn't care how good you are. Pain doesn't check your record before it comes knocking. And sometimes the people who smile the brightest are the ones hiding the darkest secrets behind their teeth. I learned that lesson the hard way. I learned it through watching my son change, through seeing my family crumble, through burying people I loved and discovering truths that made me wish I could bury them again. But I'm still here, still breathing, still standing by this lake that's seen too much of my grief. And I'm going to tell you this story because it needs to be told. Because somewhere out there, maybe someone else is living through what I lived through. Maybe someone else is being slowly poisoned by a person they welcomed into their home with open arms. I want you to understand something before we go any further. This isn't a story about heroes and villains. This isn't some fairy tale where the good guys win and everyone gets their happy ending. This is a story about real people making real choices, some of them terrible. This is about what happens when evil wears a pretty face and speaks in a sweet voice. This is about justice that doesn't look like justice at first. About truth that takes too long to surface. About a grandmother who lost almost everything, but found something she didn't know she was looking for. It all started 5 years ago, on a spring afternoon that seemed ordinary in every way. Nathan had called that morning, nervous excitement in his voice, telling me he was bringing someone special to meet me. Someone he wanted me to know. Someone he thought might be part of our family someday. Her name was Renee. From the moment Renee walked through my door, I felt the air in my home change. Something shifted, something I couldn't name, but felt deep in my bones. She smiled at me with perfect teeth and held out her hand, and I took it because that's what you do. That's what polite people do. But even as I shook her hand and welcomed her inside, something whispered in the back of my mind that I should have listened to. I should have trusted that whisper. And I had no idea that woman would one day destroy everything I loved. If you've ever trusted someone who turned your kindness into a weapon, stay with me. This story will speak to you. And don't forget to like and subscribe because what happened next still haunts me. Renee had this way of smiling that never quite reached her eyes. I noticed it that first day, though I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. She'd tilt her head just right, flash those white teeth, say all the correct things. But there was something calculated about it, like she'd practiced in a mirror until she got it perfect. Like she knew exactly what mask to wear for every occasion. Nathan didn't see it. Or maybe he didn't want to see it. He was 32 years old and completely under her spell. The way he looked at her made my heart ache because I recognized that look. That was how Harold used to look at me back when we were young and everything felt possible. But this was different. This felt dangerous. She started coming around more after that first visit, always with Nathan, always perfectly dressed, always bringing some small gift that felt more like a test than a kindness. A bottle of wine I'd never drink. Flowers I was allergic to. A scented candle that gave me headaches. When I'd thank her politely and set them aside, I'd catch this flash in her eyes. Just for a second. Like she was keeping score. The dinners were the worst. I'd cook Nathan's favorite meals, the ones I'd made for him his whole life, and Renee would push the food around her plate with this delicate disgust. She'd mention her dietary restrictions, her sensitive stomach, how she was trying this new cleanse she'd read about online. And Nathan would apologize to her. Not to me. He'd apologize for his mother's cooking like it was something to be ashamed of. That should have been my first real warning. But I made excuses. I told myself she was just particular. That maybe I was being too sensitive. That I needed to try harder to connect with the woman my son loved. So I tried. God help me, I tried everything. I invited her to lunch, just the two of us. I offered to take her shopping, to show her around town, to introduce her to my friends. She'd agree with that practiced smile, then cancel at the last minute. Always with a reason that sounded legitimate but felt hollow. A migraine. A work emergency. A friend in crisis who needed her. Meanwhile, she was working on Nathan in ways I couldn't see yet. Planting seeds. Dropping little comments that seemed innocent but carried poison in their roots. I didn't know about those conversations then. I only saw the results. Nathan started calling less. When he did visit, he seemed distant, distracted. He'd cut our time short, always saying Renee needed him for something. An errand. An appointment. Some crisis that couldn't wait. And when I'd suggest he stay a bit longer, that we hadn't had a real conversation in weeks, he'd get this defensive edge in his voice I'd never heard before. Mom, you don't understand how busy we are. Renee's under a lot of stress. She needs my support. I wanted to ask who was supporting him, who was making sure my son was okay. But I bit my tongue because I was afraid of pushing him further away. It started with whispers, small, poisonous lies that grew roots in my son's heart. I found out later, much later, what she'd been telling him. That I didn't approve of their relationship. That I'd made comments about her background, her family, her appearance. That I'd told the neighbors she wasn't good enough for him. None of it was true. Not a single word. But she said it with tears in her eyes and hurt in her voice, and Nathan believed her. How do you defend yourself against accusations you don't even know exist? How do you fight an enemy who attacks you in private while smiling at you in public? I couldn't. So the distance between us grew wider. Nathan's visits became shorter, less frequent. His calls turned formal, stiff. He stopped asking for my advice about anything. When I tried to talk to him about it, to ask what I'd done wrong, he'd shut down completely. Tell me I was imagining things. Tell me Renee had nothing but respect for me. But I could see her smirk sometimes, when Nathan wasn't looking. I could feel her victory in the way she'd touch his arm, possessive and deliberate, reminding me who had won. 6 months after they met, Nathan called to tell me they were engaged. I said congratulations because what else could I say? I asked about the wedding, offered to help plan it, tried to sound excited. But inside, I felt like I was watching my son walk toward a cliff with a blindfold on, and I was powerless to stop him. Renee took over everything. The guest list, the venue, the flowers, the menu. I wasn't consulted on any of it. When I tried to offer suggestions, she'd smile that practiced smile and say she had it all under control. That she didn't want me to stress about anything. That I should just show up and enjoy the day. I wore a dress she picked out. I sat where she told me to sit. I smiled in photos and danced when expected and pretended my heart wasn't breaking. And through it all, I watched Nathan slip further away from me, pulled by invisible strings I couldn't cut. The worst part was seeing how happy he looked. How convinced he was that he'd found his forever. Part of me wanted to believe I was wrong about her. That maybe my instincts were off, that maybe losing Harold had made me suspicious and cold. That maybe Renee really did love my son, and I was just being a bitter old woman who couldn't let go. I wanted to believe that so badly. By the time I realized what she was doing, it was already too late. If this part feels familiar, someone twisting your love against you, tell me in the comments how you handled it. And make sure you're subscribed, because it only gets darker from here. The real damage started after the wedding. Nathan came to me 3 months into their marriage with a business proposal. Harold's old company, the one Nathan had inherited, needed some capital for expansion. New equipment, new contracts, bigger opportunities. He laid it all out on my kitchen table with spreadsheets and projections, his voice eager, like a kid showing off a school project. They blamed Nathan, which meant they blamed me for raising him. They blamed Harold's memory for leaving the business to someone so irresponsible. They blamed my judgment for funding the disaster. I tried to defend him, tried to explain that Nathan had always been smart with money, that something must have gone wrong, that this didn't make sense. But people love a downfall story. They love watching someone fall from grace. And the Ellison family was falling fast. Every time I tried to reach him, she was already there, whispering first. I knew it was Renee. I didn't have proof, couldn't point to specific things she'd done, but I knew. The timing was too perfect. The decisions Nathan made were too reckless, too unlike him. Someone had convinced him to take risks Harold would have never approved. Someone had pushed him toward choices that benefited nobody except maybe her. I saw her around town sometimes, driving a new car while Nathan's business crumbled, shopping at expensive stores while my savings evaporated. She'd wave at me if we made eye contact, that same practice smile, like we were friends sharing a secret joke. Like she hadn't just destroyed my son's inheritance and my financial security in one calculated move. Nathan finally came to see me 5 months after the business failed. He looked terrible. Thin, exhausted, his shoulders hunched like he was carrying weight he couldn't set down. But when I tried to talk to him about what happened, he shut me out immediately. It's handled, Mom. Just drop it. Nathan, I gave you everything I had. I deserve to know. You deserve. His voice turned sharp, angry. You're the one who pushed me into expanding too fast. You're the one who said Harold would have wanted me to take risks. I never said any of that. Not once. But arguing felt pointless. He believed what he believed, and I knew where those beliefs came from. So I asked about the money instead. About repayment. About how I was supposed to live on what little I had left. He looked away. I can't pay you back right now. Things are tight. You'll have to wait. Then Renee called from the car, her voice sweet and impatient, and Nathan left without another word. I stood on my porch and watched him walk away from me, and I felt something break inside my chest that I knew would never heal quite right. My reputation was destroyed. My savings were gone. My relationship with my son was a hollow shell of what it used to be. And Renee had orchestrated all of it while keeping her hands clean, while playing the supportive wife, while making sure every bit of blame landed on someone else. I wanted to scream.
To cry.
To drive to their house and tell Nathan everything I suspected. But I knew he wouldn't listen. She'd already poisoned him against me too thoroughly. Anything I said would just prove her point, would just confirm whatever lies she'd been feeding him about my jealousy and interference. So I stayed quiet. I let people think what they wanted. I withdrew from social circles I'd been part of for years. I stopped going to church because I couldn't stand the sympathetic looks. I stayed home by the lake and learned to live with my rage and helplessness in equal measure. The only bright spot was Charlotte, Nathan and Renee's daughter, born a year into their marriage. She was 2 years old by then, and sometimes Renee would drop her off at my house for a few hours. Not out of kindness, I'm sure. Probably just because she needed free childcare. But I didn't care about her motives. Those afternoons with Charlotte were the only times I felt human anymore. Charlotte was beautiful. Dark curls, bright eyes, her father's smile. She'd toddle around my yard, chase butterflies, fall asleep in my lap while I read her stories. And in those moments, I could almost forget everything else. I could almost believe there was still goodness in the world. But the real cracks didn't show until the night I saw the bruises on my son's arm. Have you ever stayed silent just to keep the peace? Drop a heartbreak emoji in the chat if you have, because silence became my only defense. Nathan came to visit on a Tuesday afternoon in October. The leaves had started turning, and the lake reflected them like a mirror made of fire. I was surprised to see him. He hadn't been by in months, not since the business collapsed, and our last conversation ended in anger. But there he was, standing on my porch with his hands in his pockets, looking like the boy he used to be before Renee, before everything fell apart. "Can I come in, Mom?" I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded and stepped aside. We sat in the living room where I'd raised him, where Harold used to read the paper in his favorite chair, where 1,000 ordinary moments had happened before everything turned dark. The silence felt heavy between us. "I've been thinking," Nathan started, his voice quiet, "about how things used to be before. Before. Such a small word for such a massive divide. Before Renee. Before the lies. Before I lost my son to someone else's poison." We talked about small things at first. The weather. The lake. Charlotte and her new words, her funny habits. Nathan's face softened when he talked about his daughter, and for a moment I saw glimpses of the man I'd raised. The one who was kind and thoughtful, and didn't carry shadows in his eyes. Then he reached for his coffee cup, and his sleeve pulled back. The bruises were dark purple, almost black, wrapped around his forearm like finger marks. Like someone had grabbed him hard and held on. I stared at them, and everything else in the room seemed to disappear. "Nathan." My voice came out barely above a whisper. "What happened to your arm?" He pulled his sleeve down fast, too fast, and looked away. "Nothing. I fell. Was working in the garage and lost my balance." I'd heard enough lies by then to know what they sounded like. This was a lie. A bad one. But I didn't push, didn't press, because I could see the fear in his eyes when he said it. Not fear of me. Fear of something else. Someone else. We sat there in silence for a long time. The clock on the wall ticked. The wind rustled leaves outside. And I felt my heart breaking all over again because my son was hurt and lying about it, and I didn't know how to help him. "Mom," he said finally, his voice trembling. "If anything happens to me, if something ever goes wrong, I need you to look after Charlotte. Promise me." The words hit me like ice water. "Nathan, what are you talking about? What's going to happen?" "Nothing. Probably nothing. He stopped, swallowed hard. "I just need to know she'd be safe. That you'd take care of her." His hands were shaking. I watched them tremble as he set down his coffee cup, as he rubbed his face, as he tried to pull himself together. This wasn't just stress. This wasn't just money troubles or marriage problems. This was something deeper, something terrifying. "Of course I'd take care of her. You know that. But Nathan, you're scaring me. What's going on?" "I can't," he stood up abruptly. "I have to go. Renee's expecting me. Always Renee. Always her name as an excuse, a shield, a weapon." I stood too, tried to reach for him, tried to make him stay and talk to me like we used to. But he was already moving toward the door, already pulling away. "I love you, Mom. I'm sorry for everything. For all of it." He left before I could respond. I watched through the window as he got in his car, as he sat there for a moment with his head against the steering wheel, as he finally drove away down the long driveway lined with autumn trees. His words felt like a goodbye I wasn't ready to hear. I should have followed him. Should have called someone, done something, refused to let him leave until he told me the truth. But I was paralyzed by fear and uncertainty and years of being shut out. I didn't know what I was afraid of yet. I just knew something terrible was coming, and I was helpless to stop it. I spent that week trying to reach him. Called his phone a dozen times. Left messages he didn't return. Drove by his house twice, but the curtains were always closed and no one answered the door. I felt like I was watching my son drown from the shore, screaming for help that wouldn't come. Charlotte appeared at my door 3 days later. Renee dropped her off without explanation, just said she had errands and would be back in a few hours. I held my granddaughter close, breathed in the smell of her shampoo, and tried not to think about bruises and trembling hands and words that felt like farewells. A week later, my son was dead. If you're still with me, hit the like button. Because what comes next is every mother's nightmare. The call came at 6 in the morning. A police officer, his voice formal and distant, asking if I was Margaret Ellison, mother of Nathan Ellison, asking if I could come down to the station to answer some questions about my son. They told me there'd been an accident at the old quarry outside town, that Nathan's truck had gone over the edge sometime during the night, that his body had been found at the bottom, crushed and broken beyond recognition, that I needed to come identify what they could recover. I don't remember driving there. Don't remember signing papers or answering questions. The whole morning exists in my memory like a fog, thick and suffocating and impossible to see through clearly. All I know is that when I finally walked out of that building, the world had changed into something I didn't recognize anymore. Renee was already at the station when I arrived. She sat in a different room, crying into tissues, surrounded by sympathetic officers who brought her water and spoke in soft voices. She looked devastated, perfect in her grief, every tear exactly where it should be. She told them Nathan had been depressed about the business failure, that he'd been drinking more, that he'd gone out the night before saying he needed to clear his head, and she'd assumed he went to his usual spot to think. She didn't know he'd gone to the quarry, didn't know he'd been that upset. She blamed herself for not seeing the signs. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. Every word carefully chosen, every detail believable. She painted a picture of a troubled man spiraling downward, a loving wife who'd tried her best, a tragic accident that could have been prevented if only someone had noticed. The police believed her. Why wouldn't they? She was the grieving widow. She had nothing to gain from his death. And Nathan's recent history, the business collapse, the financial ruin, the withdrawal from friends and family, it all supported her story perfectly. They closed the case within 48 hours. Accidental death. Single vehicle collision.
No suspicious circumstances.
Just another sad ending to a life that had taken too many wrong turns. But I knew better. I knew about the bruises, the fear in his voice, the way he'd asked me to take care of Charlotte like he knew something terrible was coming. I knew my son, and Nathan wouldn't have killed himself. He loved Charlotte too much. He had too much fight in him, even at his lowest. I tried to tell them, tried to explain that something didn't add up, that they needed to look deeper, that Renee wasn't who she appeared to be. But they looked at me with pity and patience, like I was a grieving mother in denial who couldn't accept that her son was gone. Sometimes the people we love surprise us, Mrs. Ellison. Sometimes they're carrying burdens we don't see. I wanted to scream at them, wanted to make them understand that I saw everything, that I'd watched my son being slowly destroyed by the woman they were comforting in the next room. But grief makes you look crazy. Accusations without proof make you look desperate. So they sent me home with pamphlets about counseling and support groups and left me to bury my son alone. The funeral was small. Some of Harold's old friends came out of respect. A few distant relatives who'd heard the news. Renee stood at the front in a black dress, holding Charlotte, accepting condolences with grace and dignity. She never once looked at me. I stood at the back and watched them lower my son into the ground next to his father. Watched Renee throw her handful of dirt onto the casket. Watched Charlotte ask in her small voice where Daddy went. And I felt something inside me die along with Nathan, something that had kept me warm and hopeful despite everything. 2 weeks after the funeral, Renee pulled into my driveway in a brand new Mercedes. Silver, gleaming, expensive enough to feed a family for a year. She got out wearing designer sunglasses and a smile that didn't pretend to be sad anymore. She said she'd loved him. But love doesn't buy a Mercedes weeks after a funeral. She didn't stay long. Just dropped off some of Nathan's old things she didn't want. Photos, books, his favorite jacket that still smelled like him. She handed them over like they were trash she was finally getting rid of, like my son's entire life could fit in 2 cardboard boxes. He'd want you to have these, she said, her voice flat.
No emotion. No grief.
Just emptiness, where love should have been. I wanted to ask her what she'd done. Wanted to grab her shoulders and shake the truth out of her. But I was 71 years old and exhausted from loss, and she was already walking away, already done with me now that Nathan wasn't there to keep us connected. After that, I barely saw her. She dropped Charlotte off occasionally, always in a hurry, always with somewhere more important to be. She'd gotten Nathan's life insurance, his remaining assets, the house they'd shared. Everything he'd worked for now belonged to the woman who destroyed him. But I had Charlotte. Those afternoons when my granddaughter would curl up in my lap, when she'd ask me to tell her stories about her daddy, when she'd fall asleep breathing softly against my chest, those moments kept me alive. They were the only reason I got out of bed anymore. I thought I'd buried all the pain I could until the phone rang 2 years later. This is where everything changes.
Stay tuned.
And don't forget to subscribe if you want to know how justice found its way home. 2 years of silence. 2 years of watching Charlotte grow, of living with unanswered questions, of carrying grief that never quite healed. Then Renee's name flashed on my phone screen at 9 o'clock on a Thursday night. I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken since she'd dropped off Nathan's things in those cardboard boxes. But something made me pick up some instinct I couldn't name. Margaret. Her voice was frantic, ragged, nothing like the cold control I was used to. Charlotte's missing. Have you seen her? Is she with you? My blood went cold. What do you mean missing? When did you last see her? She was in her room an hour ago. I went to check on her, and she's gone. Her window's open. I don't know. I can't find her anywhere. The panic in her voice sounded real. Too real. And Charlotte was out there somewhere, alone in the dark, maybe scared, maybe hurt. Nothing else mattered in that moment except finding my granddaughter. I haven't seen her, but I'm calling 911 right now. Stay by your phone. I hung up before she could respond. My hands shook as I dialed, my heart hammering so hard I could barely breathe. The dispatcher answered on the second ring, her voice calm and professional. 911. What's your emergency? My granddaughter is missing. Charlotte Ellison. She's 4 years old. Her mother says she disappeared from their house about an hour ago. What's the address, ma'am? I gave her Renee's address, the words tumbling out fast and desperate. I could hear the dispatcher typing, entering information, staying calm while my world spun apart. Then she stopped typing. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats too long. Ma'am, we already have units at your daughter-in-law's residence. Relief flooded through me. Oh, thank God. Did they find Charlotte? Is she okay? Another pause. Longer this time. Something in that silence made my skin crawl. Ma'am, we have units there for a homicide. The word didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. I heard it clearly, but my brain refused to process what it meant. Homicide.
Death.
Murder. At Renee's house, where Charlotte had been an hour ago, where my granddaughter had vanished into the night.
What?
Who? What are you talking about? Officers are on scene investigating a death. I'm going to need you to stay on the line with me, okay? Are you at home right now? But I couldn't stay on the line. Couldn't sit in my house by the lake while Charlotte was missing and police were surrounding Renee's home, and someone was dead and nothing made any sense. I grabbed my keys with numb fingers, still holding the phone, moving on instinct and terror. I'm going there. I have to go there. Ma'am, I need you to wait for. I hung up. I know I wasn't supposed to. I know the dispatcher was trying to help. But my granddaughter was missing, and every second I wasted felt like betrayal. I got in my car and drove through the dark toward the flashing lights I could already see in the distance, red and blue painting the night sky like warnings. I could hear my heartbeat louder than the police sirens. The scene came into view as I turned onto Renee's street. Police cars everywhere, their lights spinning chaos across the quiet neighborhood. Yellow tape already stretched across the driveway. Officers moving with purpose, their faces grim. Neighbors standing on their lawns in bathrobes, watching, whispering, trying to understand what had shattered their peaceful evening. I parked badly, half on the curb, and ran toward the house. An officer stopped me before I got close, his hand firm on my shoulder. Ma'am, you can't go any farther. This is an active crime scene. My granddaughter is missing. Charlotte Ellison. She's 4 years old, and she was in that house, and I need to know if you found her. His expression shifted, softened slightly. Are you Margaret Ellison?
Yes.
Please, just tell me if she's okay. He spoke into his radio, said something I couldn't quite hear. Then another officer approached, older, with tired eyes that had seen too much. He introduced himself as Detective Briggs. "Mrs. Ellison, I need you to come with me. We have some questions." "I don't care about questions. Where's Charlotte? Is she safe? We're searching for her now. But there's been an incident inside the house. I need to ask you about your relationship with Renee Ellison." The way he said her name told me everything before he spoke the next words. Past tense.
Was.
Not is. When I reached the house, I knew the world would never be the same again. If you're feeling that chill right now, you're not alone. Hit the like button and keep watching, because this is where the truth starts to surface. They took me to a police car parked down the street. Not under arrest, Detective Briggs assured me. Just away from the scene, away from the neighbors and their cameras and their hungry curiosity. He sat beside me in the back seat, a younger officer in the front taking notes. "Mrs. Ellison, when was the last time you saw Renee?" My mind was spinning, trying to catch up with reality. Renee was dead. Someone had killed her. And Charlotte was somewhere out there, alone and scared, while I sat answering questions I didn't understand. 2 months ago. She dropped Charlotte off for the afternoon. We barely spoke. "And your relationship with her?" I almost laughed. Almost told him about the years of manipulation, the lies, the way she destroyed my son, and smiled while doing it. But this was a murder investigation, and suddenly I realized how bad that would sound. How much motive it gave me. We weren't close. She married my son 5 years ago. He died 2 years ago. We've kept our distance since then. Your son's death was ruled accidental. It wasn't a question, but I heard the implication. Heard him wondering if I'd ever believed that ruling. If I'd blamed Renee. If I'd wanted revenge. I know what it was ruled. My voice came out harder than I intended. What does any of this have to do with Charlotte? Why aren't you out there looking for her? We have officers searching the entire neighborhood. But I need to understand the situation here. Renee called you tonight? I nodded, explained the frantic phone call, the missing child, my 911 call. Briggs listened carefully, his face giving nothing away. When I finished, he exchanged a look with the other officer. Something passed between them, some silent communication I couldn't read. "Mrs. Ellison, we found Renee in her bedroom approximately an hour ago. A neighbor called it in after hearing what they thought was a gunshot. When officers arrived, they found the front door unlocked. Renee was deceased from a self-inflicted wound to the head." The words hit me in pieces. Self-inflicted.
Suicide.
Renee had killed herself while Charlotte was somewhere in that house. Had Charlotte seen it? Heard it? Run away in terror? Oh God. That poor baby. She must be terrified. We have to find her. We're doing everything we can. But there's something else you need to know. Briggs pulled an evidence bag from his jacket. Inside was an envelope, my name written across the front in handwriting I didn't recognize. "We found this on the kitchen table. It's addressed to you." My hands trembled as I stared at that envelope. Nothing good ever came in letters found at death scenes. Nothing that would make any of this easier to understand. "What does it say?" "We'd like you to read it first. But, Mrs. Ellison, I need to warn you. The contents are disturbing. And, depending on what's in there, this investigation may take a very different direction." He handed me the envelope through the evidence bag. Even through the plastic, I could feel that it was thick, multiple pages. A confession. An explanation. Something Renee wanted me to know after she was gone. But even death couldn't bury all of Renee's secrets. I opened it right there in that police car, with Detective Briggs watching my face and the younger officer's pen poised over his notepad. The first line made my vision blur. The second made my hands shake so badly I almost dropped the pages. By the third paragraph, I understood that everything I'd suspected, everything I'd feared, every nightmare that had haunted me for 2 years was real. "She killed him," I whispered. "She killed Nathan." Briggs leaned forward. "Keep reading." So I did. I read every word of Renee's confession, written in neat handwriting that looked nothing like the chaos it described. She detailed everything. The planning, the manipulation, The night she'd lured Nathan to the quarry and pushed his truck over the edge while he was unconscious from the pills she'd put in his drink. The way she'd called 911 herself, crying, playing the devastated wife, while my son's body lay broken at the bottom of a pit. She explained why. The insurance money, the assets, the freedom from a man she'd never loved, only used. She wrote about the guilt that came later, unexpected and suffocating. About Charlotte asking for her daddy every night. About seeing Nathan's face in dreams that turned to nightmares. She wrote about watching me with my granddaughter, seeing the love there, knowing what she'd stolen from both of us. About the weight of that knowledge crushing her slowly, day by day, until she couldn't carry it anymore. The letter ended with 3 sentences that made my blood freeze. I can't live with what I've done. Charlotte deserves better than me. You'll know where to look. 3 days later, the detective knocked on my door with a letter that would change everything. Tell me, do you believe in karma? Drop a comment below before you see what that letter said. I sat in Detective Briggs' office the next morning, the letter photocopied and bagged as evidence. The original words burned into my memory like brands. The confession was real, detailed enough that investigators were already reopening Nathan's case, already finding evidence that matched Renee's account. She'd killed my son, murdered him for money and freedom. And I'd had to smile at her at his funeral, had to hand over my granddaughter to her care, had to live with the knowledge that justice would never come while she walked free and comfortable in the life she'd stolen. But justice had come. Just not the way anyone expected. There's more, Briggs said, sliding another document across his desk. Renee's phone records from last night. She made several calls before she died. One to you about Charlotte. But she also called a lawyer, updated her will. Everything goes to Charlotte, with you named as guardian and trustee until she turns 18. The room felt too small suddenly. Too hot. She planned this. The whole thing. It appears so. The medical examiner estimates time of death around 8:30 p.m. She called you at 9. The neighbor heard the gunshot and called it in at 8:45. Mrs. Ellison, Renee was already dead when she spoke to you. That didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. But I talked to her. She was panicked about Charlotte being missing. The call came from her phone, but we're reviewing the voice recording now. Our tech team believes it may have been pre-recorded. Renee set up a delayed message to send to you after her death, making it sound like a live conversation. My head spun trying to process this. She'd planned everything down to that phone call. Planned her death, her confession, her final manipulation. She'd used my voice on the recording somehow, made it seem like I was responding in real time. Technology one didn't understand, employed by a woman who'd spent 5 years proving how thoroughly she could deceive people. Why would she do that? Why make me think Charlotte was missing? Briggs leaned back in his chair, studying me with those tired eyes. Because she knew you'd come. Knew you'd call 911. Knew you make sure the police found her body and the letter. She orchestrated the whole thing to ensure her confession couldn't be ignored or covered up. She wanted you to know the truth. I read her words, but my mind refused to believe them. The pages sat between us on that desk, evidence of evil and guilt, and something almost like redemption. Renee had destroyed my family, had murdered my son, had lived free for 2 years while I suffered. But in the end, she couldn't live with what she'd done. The weight of it had crushed her. What about Charlotte? My voice cracked on her name. The letter said, I know where to look. What does that mean? We've searched the house top to bottom. The neighborhood. We have alerts out across 3 counties. But wherever Charlotte is, Renee hid her somewhere safe before she died. The letter suggests she left clues for you specifically. I closed my eyes, tried to think like Renee. Tried to understand what she'd been planning. She wanted Charlotte safe, but away from the scene. Wanted me to find her, but not immediately. Wanted time for police to discover the body and the confession first. Where would she hide a 4-year-old child? Somewhere familiar, but not obvious. Somewhere Charlotte would feel safe waiting. Somewhere she'd associate with comfort and protection. Then it hit me like lightning. The playhouse. What playhouse? By the lake. Harold built it for Nathan when he was little. Charlotte loves it there. She calls it her fairy castle. Renee knew about it because Charlotte talked about it constantly. Briggs was already moving, already calling for backup, already heading for the door. I ran after him, my heart pounding hope and terror in equal measure. We took 2 squad cars, lights flashing, racing toward the lake where this whole nightmare had started 71 years ago when I'd moved there as a young bride. The playhouse sat at the edge of my property, half hidden by trees. Harold had painted it pink and purple at Nathan's request because even at 6 years old, my son had understood that houses could be any color you wanted them to be. It had weathered over the years, paint peeling, roof sagging, but Charlotte loved it anyway. She'd spend hours there during her visits, having tea parties with imaginary friends, telling stories to the stuffed animals I kept in an old toy chest. Then I realized what she meant by "you'll know where to look." If you were Margaret, what would you do next? Tell me your thoughts, because her next move gave me chills. The sun was setting when we pulled up to my house, golden light streaming through the trees like something out of a painting. It felt wrong somehow that the world could be so beautiful while so much darkness churned beneath it. Detective Briggs walked beside me, 2 other officers fanning out to search the grounds, but I knew where she'd be. I could see the playhouse through the trees, its faded purple door slightly open. My legs felt weak as I walked toward it, each step carrying hope and dread in equal measure. What if Charlotte wasn't there? What if something had gone wrong with Renee's plan? What if my granddaughter had wandered off scared and alone? But as I got closer, I heard it. Soft breathing. The gentle sounds of a child sleeping. I pushed the door open carefully, quietly. And there she was. Charlotte lay curled on an old blanket, clutching her favorite teddy bear, a small suitcase beside her with clothes and snacks packed neatly inside. She looked peaceful, innocent, completely unaware of the chaos that had erupted trying to find her. Completely unaware that her mother was gone forever. Renee had brought her here hours before she died. Had settled her into the playhouse with stories about a special adventure. Had told her to wait for Grandma Margaret, who would come find her when the stars came out. Had kissed her goodbye one final time, knowing it was the last time, knowing what she was about to do. It was the one merciful thing Renee had done in 5 years. She'd made sure Charlotte wouldn't see, wouldn't hear, wouldn't carry those nightmares forever. I knelt beside my granddaughter and touched her shoulder gently. "Charlotte, sweetie, it's Grandma." Her eyes opened slowly, confused for a moment, then brightening with recognition. "Grandma, Mommy said you'd come. She said to wait for the stars and you'd find me." Her tiny voice broke me more than any confession ever could. Detective Briggs stood in the doorway, speaking quietly into his radio, calling off the search. I gathered Charlotte into my arms, felt her weight against my chest, breathed in the smell of her hair. She was safe. Whatever else had happened, whatever darkness had touched our family, this little girl was safe. "Where's Mommy?" Charlotte asked, her voice small and uncertain. I held her tighter, my eyes meeting Briggs over her head. He gave a small nod, a gesture that said the choice was mine. Tell her now or tell her later. Either way, Charlotte's world was about to change forever, just like mine had changed when I'd gotten that call about Nathan. "Mommy had to go away for a while. But you're going to stay with me, okay? Right here by the lake, just like you've always wanted. Forever." The words stabbed through me. Forever. Because Renee was gone and Nathan was gone, and I was all Charlotte had left. An old woman and a small child, trying to build something good from the ashes of so much bad. "Forever," I whispered. We stayed in that playhouse while the sun finished setting, while Detective Briggs coordinated with social services and collected evidence and did all the official things that needed doing. Charlotte told me about her adventure, how Mommy had said it was a special game, how she'd been so good at waiting. She didn't understand why I was crying, didn't know that every word she spoke made the weight of truth heavier. The police confirmed Renee's story over the next few days. They found evidence at the quarry that matched her confession. Found digital trails showing how she'd researched Nathan's schedule, how she'd purchased the pills, how she'd planned every detail. They found journal entries describing her guilt, her nightmares, her slow descent into regret that finally ended with a gun and a letter. The case was closed officially. Murder-suicide. Nathan's death ruled a homicide.
René S. Rulé à suicide.
Justice served through tragedy, through evil consuming itself from the inside out. But even after the reunion, justice had one more turn to take. If this part touched you, leave a heart emoji below, because the ending will remind you what quiet justice truly means. Detective Briggs came by the house one last time, 3 weeks after we'd found Charlotte in the playhouse. He sat on my porch overlooking the lake, the same porch where Nathan had sat that last day with bruises on his arm and fear in his eyes. The same porch where I'd watched my world crumble piece by piece. Sometimes justice looks like tragedy, he said quietly. Not the ending anyone wants, but the ending that closes the circle. He was right. This wasn't the justice I'd dreamed of during those 2 years after Nathan died. I'd wanted Renee in handcuffs, wanted her in court, wanted the whole world to know what she'd done. I'd wanted her to pay for every lie, every manipulation, every moment of pain she'd caused. But she had paid.
Just not publicly.
Not in a way that satisfied anything except maybe the universe's sense of balance. Evil had destroyed itself. Guilt had become its own prison and executioner. The official story spread through town quickly. Renee Ellison had confessed to murdering her husband and then taken her own life, leaving behind a daughter now in her grandmother's care. People who'd believed the accident story felt betrayed. People who judged Nathan's supposed depression felt guilty. People who'd ostracized me came back with apologies I didn't particularly want. But I accepted them anyway, because holding grudges was what had killed Renee in the end. The inability to live with her choices, to find peace with her guilt, to carry the weight of what she'd done. I wasn't going to let that poison touch me or Charlotte. We deserved better than that. Charlotte started school that fall, made friends quickly the way children do, unburdened by the past they're too young to fully understand. She knows her daddy died and her mommy went away, but the details can wait. The heavy truths can wait until she's older, stronger, ready to carry them. For now, she needs bedtime stories and butterfly catching and mornings by the lake where the water reflects the sky like a promise. I sold Renee's house. The money went into a trust for Charlotte, along with the life insurance, the assets, everything that had been bought with Nathan's death. I didn't want any of it, but it belonged to my granddaughter. It would pay for her education, her future, whatever dreams she wanted to chase. Blood money turned into something clean through time and intention. The business Harold built never got rebuilt, but its memory lives on in stories I tell Charlotte about her grandfather and father. About good men who worked hard and loved deeply. About legacy that matters more than money or success. Nathan's grave has fresh flowers every week. Charlotte puts them there herself, choosing colors she thinks her daddy would like. We talk to him sometimes, tell him about our days, share our small victories. I don't know if he hears us, but it doesn't matter. We hear ourselves, and that's enough. People ask me sometimes if I forgive Renee. If I've found peace with what she did. The answer isn't simple. I don't forgive the murder. I don't forgive the lies or the manipulation or the years she let me suffer not knowing. But I understand that people are complicated. That someone can do terrible things and still feel terrible about doing them. That guilt can be its own kind of death sentence, slower but just as final. Some stories end with punishment. Mine ended with peace. Not the peace of forgetting. Not the peace of everything being fine, but the peace of knowing the truth. Of understanding that justice doesn't always look like courtrooms and sentences. Sometimes it looks like letters left behind and confessions that come too late to change anything but early enough to prevent more lies. Detective Briggs was right. Sometimes justice looks like tragedy, but sometimes tragedy clears the way for healing, for second chances. For a grandmother and granddaughter building a life together from the ruins of what was lost. Charlotte calls me Mama now, sometimes by accident. It breaks my heart and heals it simultaneously. I'm not her mother, will never replace the complicated woman who gave her life. But I'm here. I'm present. I'm the one tucking her in at night and teaching her to fish and showing her that love doesn't have to hurt. The lake still reflects the sky every morning. The seasons still change. Harold's playhouse still stands at the edge of the property, faded but sturdy. And every day I wake up grateful for another chance to get this right. To raise this child with kindness instead of manipulation. To show her that good people exist, that trust is possible, that the world can be gentle if you're careful about who you let into it. Because when I called 911 that day, I thought I was reporting a missing child. But God had already sent his answer. Charlotte was never lost. She was exactly where she needed to be, waiting for me to find her. And in finding her, I found my reason to keep living. My purpose in the years I have left. My proof that even when everything falls apart, something beautiful can grow from the wreckage. Renee destroyed herself, but she couldn't destroy us. Evil ate its own tail and left behind two survivors who chose love over bitterness. Who chose healing over revenge. Who chose to let the dead bury the dead, while we focused on living. That's quiet justice. Not loud or satisfying or anything like the movies. Just two people by a lake, making breakfast and doing homework and laughing at silly jokes. Just an old woman teaching a young girl how to be strong without being hard. Just life continuing despite everything, because that's what life does. It goes on. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it gets better. If this story moved you, give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who believes in quiet justice. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that heal and inspire. Stories about real people facing impossible choices and finding their way through darkness into light. Turn on notifications so you never miss our next story, because we're building a community here of people who understand that life is complicated, that healing takes time, and that sharing our experiences helps us all feel less alone. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us about your own experiences with betrayal, forgiveness, or finding peace after tragedy. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And remember, you're not alone in whatever you're facing. We're all walking through our own storms, trying to find our way home. Thank you for being part of this family. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here.